Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I think this is a pretty big turnout for a presentation about some future technology that's probably never gonna work anyway. So, I'm Sverre, Jørund. We are working with web clients, and recently we have been working on a project where we kind of want to have a fresh look at how the user interfaces are working and see if we can merge maybe the systems together a bit. So that's what we're going to go through. So first, the current state of things. So this is how the system is built today. And I think many of you guys are aware of this. We have the sales and marketing client that is a stack of a CRM client and net server. That's C# running on the server. And it's creating HTML, sending it out, and it's the sales client. And then we have CS, which is running on rms.exe and all its friends. Different technology, also running on the server, creating HTML, sent out to the browser. And so these are two pretty different technologies. One is C#, one is C++. We have merged the database. CS is using net server, so there are some shared entities, like person, company, stuff like that. The sales and marketing client is using, actually this is your area of expertise, so correct me when I'm wrong, but C#, .NET, ASPX. It's a single page application. It does a server-side, like I mentioned, server-side rendering of HTML parts. But it's a single page application, so the HTML parts are rendered to HTML on the server, then sent over AJAX to the browser, and the browser is replacing large parts of the DOM, large parts of the HTML page, right? So so you never really load the whole HTML page again, but you will load sections of it, and those sections will be server-side rendered. And I think there are one or two HTML configuration files, right? A few. Then there's the CS part, which is, I'm not going to down-talk our clients, but this is some cutting-edge C++ technology developed in 1998. This is not exactly state-of-the-art, and it's basically a multi-page application. That's the way we built web applications back then. So, every time you click something, every time you post something, the whole browser is reloading a new page. The CS system is honestly a collection of web pages that you're navigating through, almost like an online newspaper. Server-side rendering, of course, there's a hierarchy of different classes that create different components, and then they all just mash together and create a whole HTML page. And I think it just tells us how fast computers are these days, that a page in CS can very easily be a megabyte or 2 megabytes or something like that, and still it will build, render, and get into your browser in 300 milliseconds. So, but that's not because the technology is awesome, but because computers are fast. So it's working pretty well today, but this is of course a bit old style, and it has problems. Now, who of you guys have been modifying the page builder UI? Worked with XML files? Okay. I have very little experience with it, but I'm told it could be a bit difficult, right? It could be a complicated thing. There was a session yesterday.
Yes.
Yes.
There's so many parts that you can integrate through, and it's complicated to get a full picture, and sometimes it's kind of limiting what you want to do. So yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah. And for the CS part, multi-page application is getting a bit old. And then both clients have some fundamental problems. Server-side rendering is not snappy. I mean, even, like I said, we can get a new page up into your browser in a matter of milliseconds. It still means that if you're clicking, let's say you're inside a screen in CS and you want to add another email address recipient or something. Now, we fixed a little bit of that in the latest version, but just going a couple of versions back, you want to add an address, add a recipient. So you click a button, that sends a form over to the server. The server instantiates, 20, 30 different classes. They are building a lot of HTML now with that new address. All of this is rendered to an HTML page, sent over the wire back to the browser, and the browser shows you that you have a new address. So that's kind of a lot of stuff for just adding a new address, right? And it's not snappy, even though, if you're multiple users sitting there, maybe it comes down to a second. And clicking a button and waiting 1 second for something to refresh on the screen is just not snappy. It's not a really good user experience. So we are using a lot of CPU resources to give you a user experience that is not optimal, right? And that's just because that's how we built web pages before, because the browser was stupid. The browser couldn't do anything else than show static HTML pages to some extent. And for our online environment, it's even worse, because it's not like you have your own server, right? We have thousands of customers who are sharing servers. So having all that user interface processing done locally on the server is bad economy, right? It means we need to have more servers to serve those users. And they're sitting out there on their expensive laptops and powerful notebooks and what's not. And the browser is really not doing anything intelligent. It just keeps showing HTML pages, which is not that expensive. So these are challenges with the current technology. Also, it's pretty difficult to integrate between the clients, right? Because, okay, so we have two clients. And for instance, we have a mailing system, which is something that came from eJournal. And the whole mailing user interface is built using eJournal CS user interface technology, which means that when we are showing mailings inside the sales and marketing client, it's inside an iframe, which is limiting, right? And if you really look close, you can actually see it on the border that it's slightly different shades and something there that's not perfect. And if you click somewhere inside the mailing, it has difficulties controlling the sales and marketing application around it. It's not straightforward to get a click inside mailing to navigate, for instance, to a person card or a company card or something like that. Obviously, you've seen that the clients look very much the same, but that's just because we are developing components that are looking the same, but we have to develop them twice. We have to develop them in C# technology, and we have to develop them in C++. So, the drop down, the input fields, the MDO control components, and all of that. And I would love to get that calendar inside CS, but currently the only way of doing that is to re-implement it in CS technology. So it's kind of expensive for us. This is working all right, but it's not optimal. Did I totally destroy any good image we had of ours? Yes, sales pitch of the year. Okay. Well, I only did that, to kind of sell up the future, the awesome stuff that I think we're working on. That's going to be a lot better. So the future looks like this. The future is that we have somewhere down the road one single client. That client will show a user interface that is entirely built in the browser. We don't have server-side HTML rendering anymore. It's in the browser that, using JavaScript, we are saying, create a drop-down component, create a calendar view, here's a person card, here's a request view. All of this is done in JavaScript, creating HTML nodes locally. And it's using all of these components, all of these JavaScript code that will create this user interface. That's what's inside Skill. So SuperOffice Client Interface Library is really just a JavaScript library containing functions and classes for building a SuperOffice look and feel user interface in the browser. And then all communication with what's on the server will only be data, right? So it will talk to the CRM client there, and it will talk to CS over there, using REST and JSON. and it will do stuff such as, get request, get person, create appointment, download document. All of that will be Ajax methods in the background, which means suddenly we can tightly integrate it. Because you can mix a request view and the calendar, just mash it up together, and then getting those calendar appointments will go over to NetServer and get those, and then getting the request, it will go over to CS and get those. We will still have those two different components because that's where all our business logic is, and rewriting the whole CS to .NET, which is something we want to do as well, but that's kind of a huge task, hundreds of thousands of lines about how a ticket should escalate if the priority is backwards and whatnot. So it's a lot of code to port, and that will not immediately give us a benefit. In fact, here we can merge the user interfaces, and the fact that the user interface is talking to a couple of different components on the server to get those data. Who cares? Maybe it's going to also go talk to Google and talk to the weather forecast system and whatnot, and show that as well up in a mashed up user interface. And honestly, if you're sitting in a client that's behaving coherently and where all the user interface controls are the same, look the same, behave the same, you don't really care how many data servers are behind serving you content. So I think that's where we want to go. So,
yes. So the goals we have for making skill, as we call it, is have a shared UI library between CRM and sales and service, to be able to not make things twice, and also so they can integrate better, like Sverre said. In order to accomplish that, we need to live with the old world and the new world. A couple of, I don't know how long, but some time still. So new stuff and old stuff will live side by side. So in the sales client, you will some areas will be using skill, some will be using the old page builder framework, and it will do that for quite a while still. What you hopefully will notice when you're in the client, you will notice that the skill part of the application will go. It's more responsive, more fluent, and give you a better experience. As you said, the goal is to move the heavy load of making HTML on the server side, moving the load up to every one of your computers instead, because your computer has a lot of CPU that you can use instead of using the service. We also have introduced TypeScript to our project. So we are writing this as TypeScript, so we internally can have a better compile time error detection, and then so we make their code easier. We have better intelligence, so and it makes it easier for our developers to develop coding skill.
How many guys know what TypeScript is?
TypeScript is typed JavaScript, basically.
Yeah. So it's a version of JavaScript, but you run it through a compiler to create JavaScript, which means that you can catch errors and get intelligent stuff prior to shipping out your application.
And as we said many times, we have a closer integration between sales and service that you won't notice which part comes from where. So that's going to be a better experience for the user. We also want to test all our skill code is going to be unit tests. That's going to be part of our developing scheme, that we always test our components. And there's a mandate in our project that everything should be easier to customize for partners. So the point of making good tooling for our partners to be able to customize the UI is very important. Also, it's very important for us to be able to customize the UI in an online environment, not just on site. And one of the big thing with this is that we reduce the talk to net server quite a lot, which obviously makes everything faster. So we cache more out in the browser and remove the need to talk very much to net server and the web client part, so it will go faster.
Yep. And I think if you remember Atle's presentation from day one, I mean, you guys had been, playing around with Sales Marketing Client quite a lot. You had created a lot of new user interfaces. And so, like, one of the goals is that you should be able to do this easier. So maybe then you can only invoice fewer hours, but I'm sure you can figure out a way to work around that. And so how many of you guys have been doing some JavaScript user interface development? Some of you guys. So I don't know if you noticed, but there are a couple of libraries out there already. Like, yeah. So why on earth are we reinventing the wheel, right? Why aren't we just going with Angular, Aurelia, or React, or whatnot? And we have looked at all of those because there's like 13 on the dozen libraries that offers you tons of functionality for creating a user interface. And I mean, if you start with boilerplate, Angular 2 examples, for instance, within very little code, boom, suddenly you have a whole web application running. So these frameworks are awesome. It's just that we already have a software, and it doesn't fit that well. And we have been trying, and I think we've done a very serious effort on trying, because it's not like it's not like we're obsessed with creating stuff ourselves in SuperOffice. If there's some existing technology we can use, then that's great. But a lot of these libraries kind of force you to develop the application their way. So in Angular and Aurelia, for instance, you will be doing a lot of HTML templating. You'll create templates that you reuse. And the problem is that in our user interface, templates are not quite unique. You need components with actually quite some logic and some built-in behavior that's even stronger. A lot of these libraries, they have their own router that allows you to you specify the application as this folder is the administration interface, this is sales, this is appointment, and down there you have components and so forth. But we have a router, it's on the server side, and it's dynamic because you can add more pages and more views in the database. So having a fixed router in files on the server doesn't fit that well. And then also, a lot of these libraries, they're great and they're made for single page application, but service is just not there yet. I think down the road, service will be a single page application, but currently it's not, it's a multi-page application. Which means that if every single page, every single view you do in service, if it's gonna fire up Angular and do a 2-3 second boot time to load all those JavaScript libraries, that's just not gonna work, right? Every page refresh in service having that. So we have tried, and it just wasn't an obvious fit. We played around with what do we need to do ourselves to create not the whole Angular. I mean, we're not making Angular here. We're making whatever it is we need to build a user interface. And we see that most of the work will have to go into making the SuperOffice look and feel components anyway. And that we would have to do in either case. So building our own very, very small scale framework for making the user interface seemed like an easier way to go. And just to give you a very quick conceptual idea of what skill is, basically you will have user experience like this. The customer navigates somewhere. The user is clicking somewhere, right? Like, I want to view company, I want to look at the request, I want to do something like that. And the system gets what we call a recipe. And a recipe is basically a structure that says this screen is going to look like this. So the recipe is a structure that says, there's an outermost component, and inside there there's a splitter, and then there's some tabs, and inside there are some input fields and stuff like that. And this input field is the first name, this input field is the last name, and this one cannot be empty. All of this is described in currently a JSON structure. That is quite simple and quite minified. And it also says that all of this user interface is going to be controlled with this particular controller. And the controller, and it's getting back to that, the controller is the business logic unit out for that screen. So the controller is the one that says, no, you cannot click save because you haven't filled out the first name. Or, if you check this checkbox, then we're going to do this and that. All that is described in the recipe. So a recipe gets fed to skill, and it's kind of a self-containing unit for a piece of the user interface. Skill builds that. So based on the recipe, it says, okay, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create that input controller. I'm going to go ahead and create that input component and create that controller and put it together. And then I'm going to say run. And so then it is executed into the screen. It can load data from the server using RESTs. It can let you work with them. It can let you save some stuff back to the server, like you change the person, okay, save it back to the server. And then the customer is going to navigate somewhere else. So this is the lifetime cycle of a screen section using skill. And here is the funny slide that shows how it's built up. The components we had. And basically, really the most important part is this part here. And it's, Jørund's going to come into that, it's based on MVC basically pattern. And we're just saying that this section I talked about, there is this recipe, it describes a part of the screen, and that part of the screen has a context. And that's just kind of the outermost layer. And that context is going to contain a controller, that's a business logic. It's going to contain a view model, that's the state. That's where first name says John, and last name is Doe, and age is 40, and email address and whatnot. And then it's a view, and a view is just a collection of all the user interface components that are showing and allowing you to manipulate this data. And then you have components, and they will have subcomponents, and further on, because you build up a screen in kind of a hierarchically fashion, with some panes, and then some tables, and then there are some grids and some components and so forth. And then we also have something called validations and behaviors, which allows you to very easily configure that, like we said, first name cannot be empty. And then this is one screen. And on top there, these are just some global stuff that is also out there running in the skill world. Very simple, we have the router that just tells you that, okay, now I'm finished with this screen, I'm going to go over here. The router is taking care of getting the recipe and instantiating all that stuff. There's a factory, we're using the factory pattern to create stuff, and this is cool for you guys because it means you can inject your stuff, tell the factory that, I have my own special thing that I want to show, telling the factory that if a recipe comes in and it says it's going to show map, then, use my component here that shows a Google map or something like that. There's a data manager that will take care of all the... When we're fetching things, we're going through a data manager, and that's cool because it can cache things locally in the browser. I think we can speed up the user interface a lot by caching in the browser instead of caching in that server. And then there's the superstate, which is where all the magic in CRM is.
Yes, superstate is something we need in sales. That is basically a context with just a controller and a view model, so without a UI. So we use the same concept on the superstate, and the superstate is basically holding what page are you on, what are the currents and stuff like that. So we are mirroring the superstate on the server out in the browser, so skill has the same perception of the world as the server has. When we ask the server about stuff, the skill will think the same. So that is kept in sync, and it is actually doing that today already before skill. So we just today encapsulated that in a context, so it's available for the skill component. Yeah, we're gonna. Svel mentioned MVC. That's nothing new. Trygve, he introduced that in Smalltalk in '76. So it's not like we are bleeding edge. It has been evolved over the years, of course, and you have many variants of it coming up. We are landing on, I don't know where to fit our stuff, but it's in the MVC. So we have a lot of well-known patterns, and our fit perfectly in the MVC pattern. And just next one, please. You can see that it's made for separation of concern, basically. It's like you have this model component that is controlling, is holding all the data that the worker should use with. So that's where the data is held between the view and the controller. So the view will then use these data to show in the UI for application, and the controller is the in-betweener that can process and apply business logic to the data based on what's actually happening and manipulate data using the model and interact with the view, so the final render will happen. That's MVC, how we see it.
And I think the biggest change, of course, here is that the controller, the business logic unit, is moved from being server side to being browser side. And I mean, that's a very important part of the snappiness.
Explain that later.
Okay, sorry.
Do you have a pointer? Yeah. Here. So, how is Skill compared to the framework, page builder framework we have today in the sales client? That is that the concepts are quite similar, except we moved them from the server side to the browser. So you can see at the recipe, that is now the JSON recipe. It's of course much better than the page configuration XML, but it's basically the same. It's a description of how the UI should look and how it should interact with each other. On the page builder, we have something called data handlers. That is basically the controller. That's the one that's responsible for fetching the data, manipulate the data based on actions from the UI and stuff. And this is what the controller will do. We have added something called behaviors in Skill. The behaviors are, since the recipe in Skill is something that we fetch once and use many times, not like the page builder one that each user, you will fetch the configuration and then it will be manipulated by filters based on your rights and functional rights, your license and stuff like that. We have introduced runtime behaviors instead of filters that filters away stuff you're not allowed to see. So the behaviors will then take over for the filters in calculating what you're going to see, what is disabled, what is removed, and stuff like that. So, but the concept is the same. So these are what are different from page builder to Skill. It's moved from the server side to the browser. So what they still share is the superstate. Like I mentioned, the superstate is reflected in the browser, so the Skill has quick access to whatever superstate contains, but it's synchronized with the server side. So they have the same, because there are a lot of logic still, since this is going to live side by side for a long time still, they need to be in sync. So there's a lot of functionality still in the server side that needs to update the superstate so they have the same perception of the world. The router is actually, for the sales client, the router is going to be the page update functionality, the function that interprets the SSO protocol in sales today will be the one that is the router for Skill, because they have this needs to know about both worlds in order to be able to old stuff and new stuff. We have the context, which is the self-contained unit, an isolated unit that could be anything in your UI, basically. Today we were going to make, today it will be, normally it will be a card on the level in the UI, or a dialogue. That will be a context. But there's nothing wrong of having context that contains context that contains context in a hierarchy. And that's probably what you're going to see more, because then we can, like fragments in the page builder framework, you can reuse context in different parts of the UI. And a dialogue is just a normal child context, yeah, it consists of a view, a controller, and a view model. So this is just a container for the three parts that I'm going to now. So, like, take the controller is like a data handler. It controls the data between the view model and the view, basically. It fetches the data through a data manager that will cache our data, that makes it faster, but and it will manipulate and generate the data structures that is needed for the views to render, basically. So when a company, let's see what he has written here. Yeah, you can read here. I can talk about the controller. The controller is responsible, is fetching the data, acting on user input. On when you add you check off a checkbox in the UI, a message will go to the controller. As an example, the controller will then, okay, this value is checked on, then I need to fetch these data, or I will have to change these data. Changing these data will then again give notice to the UI, and they need to be updated. This is like the logic of the UI is controlled in the controller. Yeah. View model is where the data, what you are displaying in the UI is contained. It's basically carriers. You can call it. You can draw a line to the carrier, and it's more pointed to the actual UI. It will not be that bloated as a carrier, because a carrier is a more generic object that represents the contact. Usually you don't want to use all that in a page, so maybe you narrow it down and you extend it to what actually you want to do in the UI. So it's more to the point of the thing you want to do. So the view model is something that is populated from the data manager, which can use data from a REST call or for a cache or from, yeah. Yep. The component is what you actually see on the screen. That's the controls, or it's a container of other components. So the component is something when the router is getting a recipe. It will tell the view to create your root component, and the root component will then get the recipe part that belongs to the root component. In that recipe, there are possibly a lot of other components, child components, that it again will instantiate its child components and send the recipe further on, and the child components will generate their child components, and so on and so on and so on. So it will build itself up, and a lot of components will be basically layout containers, which just contains all the components. But in the end, you will end up with text boxes and check boxes and stuff like that. These components have, if you click, be decorated with behaviors. So the behaviors is what I talked about, an additional way to control the visual representation of the component. So you can data bind a behavior to a specific data in the controller that says if this data is like this control should be hidden, or it should be disabled, or it should be green, something like that. So the behavior is like corresponding functionality to the check filters you have in Page Builder. Okay.
Is that enough theory for first session in the morning? So as long as you understand the component, the controllers, and the view models, and the behaviors, then I mean you're good to go. So it's a bit technical, but we have a demonstration that hopefully will, to some extent, clarify and make it interesting. So I have, let's see if I can get this up and running. So here I have a empty nothing so far. It's but what is interesting is this. I'm going to build here a small user interface that will communicate with the server over using REST to get and fetch some data, fetch and update persons. And so together we will see if we can manage to build a small user interface to show that. And so what we will do is we will build a recipe, right? Because that's what we've been saying now a few times, is that the way you construct user interfaces now is by creating recipes. And so the cool part here is that this is an HTML page I have here that has nothing SuperOffice stuff in it. It's only client side. This is just a static, stupid HTML page. It includes a JavaScript reference to the skill library. And then it includes a reference to the recipe. I'm just making the recipe as a straightforward JavaScript file that I'm including. And then that will be sufficient. So your page doesn't have to come from inside the SuperOffice application. Your page can just be a regular HTML page anywhere, and it will communicate with SuperOffice, where SuperOffice now is a back-end server serving you data and offering you business logic, but the user interface doesn't have to be inside the application. Okay, so this is that big enough? Should I just try to, maybe I zoom it a little bit? It's going to be too big. So this is a empty recipe. And as you saw, the page was not that terribly interesting. So I'm going to start to decorate this a little bit and try to explain. And please feel free to ask questions as long as we go. So here's my cheat sheet with the big thing. So let's just start with throwing in some controller stuff. So as we have explained now, the system is built from a controller, which is the business logic unit, and then there's a view with all the components, which is the stuff that you can see. And so for the controllers, we have tons of different controllers, of course, and the one that's very generic is a form controller, and that's a controller that basically says that, yeah, you have a form showing some kind of, first name, last name, age, email addresses, and so forth. And then there's a little URL and a save URL, and that's where I'm going to go to fetch data to populate those components, put in the first name and the last name so you can see it. And there's a save URL, and that's where I'm going to go and save if you manipulate any of that data. So REST services, right? And this particular REST service that I have created here, just to show you that as well, is this. It's a small piece of CRM script that is loading it's called a customer in CRM script, but we all know that's a person. So it's getting a parameter in, person ID, and it's loading that person, and then we are looping some fields. I have them up there, first name, last name, notes, Mr. and Mrs. Those are just the 4 attributes I'm going to expose here. And so if you get a post in with a save, then we're going to set those values and save. And if not, we're going to use the JSON builder, or actually in any case, we're going to use the JSON builder and load those values and return to you. So this is a very simple REST service that can take first name, last name, note, Mr. and Mrs. in, and save it, or look it up and return it as a JSON structure. So that's all, right? So I am specifying here that I am going to use the form controller. I'm going to load this URL, and I'm going to save with this other URL. So these are pointing to my script there. And so saving this, and out here, nothing really happens, except now I didn't get an error message saying there was a known controller. And also actually we get unsupported here because the view part is still pretty empty. Let's start by something very, very simple. So I'm just going to go and throw in, let's see if we can make this work, just to get you on board. So now that's how I specify a view, isn't it? A root component, let me just double check. Yeah. So now I'm just saying that my view is going to be one single component. It's going to be a type input text, which is just, text input, the caption and data path. And I think, I actually never tried this, but I think now out here we should get one single text box. It's not terribly exciting, but hopefully you can see that a small section of JSON structure gets thrown at skill, and skill will create a user interface to match that. And the cool thing is that this component now is already bound to an attribute in the view model, a variable, so to say, in the view model, and the controller is capable actually of loading and saving that view model. Not something you can see right here, but there's actually some stuff bound up in the background here. So let's see if we can make this slightly more interesting. So I'm going to go instead, as a root component instead, I'm going to go and create paints controller components. We're still struggling a bit with getting remembering all the terminology here. So let's see if I do like this. Yeah, thank you. For some reason, there we go. So is that going to work? Yeah, not bad. So hopefully you see. Again, here's another type of component, right? So I'm saying this is type paints, which is type of thingy. I can specify some layout attributes on it. I will give, and this is, we have been trying to structure this so that any kind of component will have some common attributes that are at the root level of that node, such as layout, type, obviously, some of where in the view model this thing is bound to. And then there's a config, and then there's stuff that's specific for this particular component type. So that the paints component will get information about what paints is going to show, right? As for the text component, it's going to have configuration about, is it plain text or password or stuff like that. So that's the particular attributes of a component. And I'm not showing this, but what is very cool is, for instance, the paints controller. If this data binding, you bind it to the view model. And like we said, the view model is the state. That's where all the variables is. So these things will update automatically. So if the view model, I have created an array of something, persons, right? And it contains one person. So if I bind that paints to that, it will show one person. If suddenly in the view model, data is coming from the server, so now there are 3 persons instead of 1, automatically the screen will update and you will have 3 tabs. So all these components are continuously reflecting the view model. If the view model is updated, like a background service fetching from the server, maybe updated list of requests, updated list of persons in the chat queue, things like this. It's very simple. All we need to do is update the view model, and whatever components we have that are bound to this, they will automatically update. So the screen will refresh and update and always reflect that data. And that makes it a lot easier to program. You just have to change the data and the view is updated. So let's throw in some more stuff. So I'm gonna, on my pane there, I'm gonna give it a vertical split. So again, we are creating a hierarchy of components. I mean, if any of you guys have played around with custom screens in CS, I mean, you know how it looks, right? You have a top component, and then you have something underneath and something underneath. And it's the same thing here. So now I have my first pane, which is called main stuff, and it has something called component, which is again what it's going to show inside the first pane, first tab. And inside there again, I'm doing something that's called vertical splits, and I'm sure you can imagine what that does. You know, splits, that's its area into two, and it has again some attributes which is called left and right, which is what's going to be inside there again. So just throwing in this one is probably, yeah, now we have two unsupported instead of one. Yeah, it's moving forward. On the right-hand side, let's see. On the right-hand side, we are going to put in a very simple component. Okay, is it underneath the config, is it? Yeah. So now on the right-hand side, it's not saying unsupported, it's showing the data of the view model. Currently the view model is very empty because we don't have anything in there yet. But on the right-hand side, when we start putting in more stuff now, it will reflect. It's just a very stupid component that just dumps the whole view model. Like I said, view model is the state, right? That's where I keep first name, last name, age, all email addresses or whatnot. So this thing is going to start dumping that data as soon as it comes in. On the left-hand side, we are going to have a very typical component, which is the one I collapsed, so I can't see it. Thank you. Yep. So left-hand side, we're going to have something called a table layout. Table layout is, you know, one of those caption component, caption component, caption component, like in the edit person card, for instance. And so I'm just now going to throw in the whole rest part of this. So about to there. So let's see. Format something. So here we have left. So the left side of that vertical split is going to be a table layout. It's going to have children, and then we have components, so there's like components all over the place here. The first one is input text. It has caption ID, has a data path, and now it's getting interesting because data path is a string that points into the view model to say where in the view model is my data, right? And it's just a string, but we use dot notation. So let's say that in the view model, maybe you're going to have a person. It's going to be customer, and then there's going to be customer.first name, customer.last name, and customer.email address, .0, .label, .whatnot. And what you do is when you set up the data path for these, you're just saying you're a text component, and your data is over there. And then whenever data in the view model is changed, the text component will update itself and show what the current data is. So you can imagine something coming from the server, put into the view model. That text control is immediately going to reflect and show that. All the way around. If you go into the text control and you change something, text component, and change something, it will update the view model so that they are kept in sync. I have some particular information on this ID thingy. This is because this is the ID of the person I'm going to look up, so it's hooked up to a change event. But for instance, here we have the salutation. As you can see, it's very easy to create a component, right? I mean, imagine you want to create a SuperOffice text box or drop-down or something, and we have 3 lines here. That's sufficient. We're saying it has a caption, it's of a type, and then we're pointing into the view model saying your data is over there. Here we have a first name part, and as you can see, it has a validation of type mandatory validation. So for instance, this field cannot be empty. Same goes for last name. Then we have type text area, which is going to be a small text area for the notes part. And then there's a button. And the button will make sure that if the form is not valid, then the button will not be active, so you can't click it. And then it has a command, save, that's going to trigger the save in the form controller, telling the form controller that, I've been clicked, I want you to save. And if you remember, the controller then points to REST interface saying, okay, I'm going to go and send this data to the controller. So, is this going to work? Woo! So here we have a user interface, somewhat SuperOffice looking on the left, and the view model reflected on the right. So this ID field here is a little bit special. I told the system that whenever I change the value here, it should tell the controller that the value has changed. And the controller then will say, okay, I'm going to go to the server and fetch that person. So if I go 1, enter, and it looks up person number 1 from my CRM system, throws that into the view model, and as you can see, the components are bound to that. So, let's say that she went around and got married, and you can see it changes there, changes in the view model. If I click save, and we go over to SuperOffice CRM here, that's not her. She is in this one, isn't it? So now it's a Mrs. I can change person here to number 2. And the REST service will go and fetch that data. It will put it into the view model. It's reflected here, and we can see number 2 is Mr. Matt Code. And so obviously this is not a full-blown user interface, but I hope you could see that with a JavaScript description file that was not that terribly long and a small REST service in the background, we have created our own custom user interface for manipulating and looking at persons. And I just also wanted to show you, for instance, remember how we said that we had these behaviors? So if I go and backspace a bit here, then that didn't work at all. How cool is that? Demo example. Why didn't it work? Let me just make sure I have everything copied correct. Any ideas?
Didn't get the validation over?
Yeah, here we have mandatory validation, right? So let's try it again. Re.
But you didn't cover the validation yourself.
Where? Here we have this one.
Yeah.
It's one of our standard validations.
Okay.
Any idea, Jørund?
No, not from here.
Well,
You have to show the controller.
Okay, so I'm not going to start debugging this on stage because that's never going to work. But in theory, you can imagine that once, backspacing just down there, this save button should be ghosted, right? And that's the idea. That whenever you change in the view model, we have the controller will
I'm sure it isn't disabled because I see here the button says read only is changed.
Yeah, but then it should have been ghosted. Maybe I changed. No, it's doing stuff.
Anyway,
Well.
you can tell here. If you type something in first name, it's going too much. If you clear it, anyway, you will see here that it gets the message when he clears out the first name that the button says read only has changed. So
Yeah,
why
and
it
now
doesn't reflect there, I'm not sure.
invalid form is false. And if I backspace, it should have gone to true. Oh well. So a few more bugs we have to sort out. But as you can see, the main idea is still that you should be able to create pretty standard user interfaces without programming so much. We'll create a recipe that will use our standard components, our standard controls, and our standard behaviors, and you will be able to, get your customized user interface to a large extent. And then, if you want something really more special, such as, I want to show a Google map of something or something like that, then we will also create support so that you can, create your own components or your own controls and inject them into the factory. And then when your recipe comes along saying that, I want my own particular component that's going to show this in this particular way, then you will get that inside the user interface without having to iframe or without having to do a lot of programming. And just to show you,
Can I ask a small question?
Yes, please.
If you injected, say, a new field on an existing form, would you then get the same events for that? So your data also was saved along with the other lists?
Well, that totally depends on the controller. The controller is the one that says, when something happens, I'm going to do this or that. Yeah. So this particular form controller just takes everything in the view model, all that data, and just wraps it up and sends it to the server. Yeah. So your backend REST service need to be expecting this. Your view model need to reflect whatever you're going to post. And so if you create more fields, then they will be wrapped up and sent as well. Yeah. So if I would have added one more field here for solid title, for instance, that would have been sent to the server. Now, currently my backend didn't support that, but just adding one field to that backend service, it would also support retrieving and fetching the title of the person. So, and that's pretty cool, right? And adding one field here is just, one more line in the backend service and one more block here in the recipe. But like I said, and I think this is hopefully where most of you guys will be working. You will be using our components and creating your own recipes. But just to show you, this is the code of the input text component. So it's not like it's a huge part. And we're using, this is TypeScript, which allows us to do very easily classes and inheritance. So this class is just inheriting from our standard component class, which would be the same you would do. Google Map components, extending components, and then you will input your own. This is the HTML I want to render. This is what I want to do if the data in the view model is changed, and this is, if you do something here, click someplace on the map, I want to save that back into the view model. Actually, I think I need to move on. Any more questions, or is that does it make sense to some extent? Yeah. Okay, cool.
Yeah. So the first part we're gonna use skill in is new inbox. Hope I like to say this. Yeah. New inbox, chat. Inbox for the sales and chat for the service. That will be the first big test for the skill project. And all new features we will use skill to develop. After a while, we'll have a lot of recipes that will be able to share between sales and service. So, which parts of the client that is going to be skillified is still unknown, but we'll see. And also, we will start using the REST API that has been talked about, or
I think it's actually right now, isn't it?
It's right now.
Next door.
So we will use the new REST API that is provided.
Yeah.
That's short term.
Where is this going in the long run? Well, as I already said, one client to rule them all. I think that's about time now. We managed to, finally do merge of service and sales. That's going to be nice, I think. And so that's going to be a single page application. It's going to have a lot more local states out in the browser. And I mean, this is a result of, how the technology has evolved. The browser is the new operating system. And so we can benefit a lot from that. We can create a much better user experience because a lot more of the stuff is stored in the browser. And then the SuperOffice application, to some extent, is more going to be a back-end service provider, right? So you don't get the user interface from SuperOffice, but you have, get person, save person, get appointments, give me a list of whatever drop-downs and stuff like that. And maybe down the road, we can even talk about some offline HTML support, because now all of this local state in the browser, and all the data we're fetching, we're using it through a data manager that could have a toggle that says, okay, I'm in offline mode now, just like you have offline mode in the new Pocket. And since everything is rendered locally and so forth, maybe we could talk about an offline browser application. So, and that's pretty cool, I think. And service and sales completely integrated, as I've said many times now. With we can combine components in a much better way. And one of the things we're looking at now, for instance, is the new chat functionality, where when you're chatting with someone, you want to see who is that customer, and so we can show the person information, and we can reuse the person dialogue basically inside the chat component, because that whole thing is just going to be a context, a standalone user interface brick that we can put into also the chat interface. So it allows us to do a lot of cool stuff like that. And what does it mean to you guys?
Yeah.
I guess we've been over
that. The one important thing here is that this is be able to do this customization online is very important for us. So the deployment of your customization should be far simpler than it is today, because today we don't allow DLL and shit.
Did you type that?
In the online environment. I didn't write that. So our goal is to enable you to make your customization using recipes and some kind of scripting of controllers, maybe needed, to be able to enable you to customize the UI in an online environment. Therefore, the tooling for, I don't know if JSON is any easier to write than XML, so I think we need some tooling for making the UI recipes.
Yeah.
So that will be somewhere in the horizon.
That's true. Okay, that was pretty much it. Are there any more questions to this?
So how many years are we talking about for implementing it in one client?
Yeah. That's 5 years. I would be very surprised if we didn't get around to it until 5 years. But it's we haven't. Things tend to take more time, of course, than we expect. But 5 years, I think. Before that, I really hope we will get around to it before that. So, chat and inbox will be using this, and those are actually on the supposed to be ready around Q1 or something like that. So that's really something we're working on right now, using the skill library for the first sections in both sales and marketing and service. And then we will really try. We will see how quickly can we skillify parts of the system. And I think we will move towards one client. I think it will be service that will, get inside sales and marketing. Pretty much, that's kind of makes sense. And we do have a prototype of how we can use the existing hard-coded screens of service. The new or the view request or the edit person, all of those. How they can, instead of render out HTML, they can render out a recipe. So that you can use skill and you can just say, give me that particular screen from service, but add a small parameter, which means I'll get it as a JSON recipe instead of that whole screen, and then skill can show that screen instead. And if we manage to get this working, then we could really move fast forward on getting all those service screens, because we don't want to rewrite them all. Then we could use the existing screens and get them into skill, into the complete client quite quickly.
Please remember that we've done modifications. We
Yes.
have to continue. We can't wait 3 years
if you start modifying something, we can wait 3 years to upgrade till you have the complete package. So
No.
There has to be a kind of
We are very
how you can phase in some modifications.
we are very focused on that, and absolutely. I mean, that's also one of the reasons, like I said, why didn't we go with XYZ.js or Angular or whatever? Is because that would be total radical shift towards a complete different platform. And we can't do that. We got to pull the zipper a bit gradually here. So we have been very focused on how can we make this live together with the existing server-side technology.
So which version will this technology be implemented?
Well, when we're coming on chat and inbox, which is going to be like 8 point something coming quite soon, early next year, it will be available in its first version. We are still, playing around with it and using it, and when using it, we're figuring out that we were, pretty stupid when we did that, and we have to change it around and so forth. So there will be there. Right now, it's moving a bit too much for you guys to start looking at it. But I'm thinking, during next year, I'm hoping it will be stable enough for you guys to be able to maybe start using it.
Will we be able to put it inside a tab or inside sales and marketing?
You can put it wherever you want, because as you saw, what I showed there was just a standalone static HTML page.
Okay.
So you can create your own web page on an Azure server, and all it needs to do is include the skill.js, and then you have to throw at it some kind of recipe that you can have locally or from a REST service or from anywhere, and say that and please communicate with SuperOffice, which is over there.
That could be done during the next year.
That can absolutely be done during next year.
Next expansion.
Yeah, honestly, if we don't manage to get that working for 1 year, then we did something terribly wrong.
Then we won't see you.
Yeah, exactly. So if we are not present on Expandable 2017, then sorry, yeah.
Any ideas on how to get certified? And I think this will occupy WatchCom a lot.
I don't know. WatchCom this. Well, we'll do some testing, and it could be that I'm being naive now, but I think when it comes to security implications, there are not that many, because all of this is just how the user interface is rolling around inside your browser. All the business logic, all the advanced stuff is still happening on the server. And I mean, if you create a recipe, there's a limitation to what kind of crazy stuff you can do in there, because the recipe only supports whatever attributes we are telling our engine to pick out from that recipe, which is, there's no embedded JavaScript or anything like that. Recipe can only, it contains a path to the view model, and if you write something evil there, it's not going to work.
So this JavaScript file is skill file.
Skill.js, yeah.
So it's going to be accessible in a year or something.
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Well, it will be a part of our distribution as soon as we get chat and inbox out the door.
Okay. So
but
we can experiment.
You can experiment with it, and we're going to tell you that the thing is still moving around a bit, so you don't want to, build your huge application entirely based on it, but it will be available. There's no way we can hide it. It will be a part of the distribution fairly soon.
Concerning WatchCom, you will need to certify the REST API, I guess, or the communication.
Well, the REST APIs, yes, the REST APIs will need to be certified.
I mean, you showed the script serving this JSON, and this one you would also have to certify, I guess.
Well, but now you're talking about creating an app. If you, as a third party, want to.
Yes, for instance.
Yeah, absolutely. If
I want to make a backend for
well, if you want to create an app, right? And so you can either use, our REST interfaces, if they will work for you. And if you need something very, very special, then you will have to create your own cloud solution, your own Azure, whatever thingy. And there you will have a REST API that, again, will piggyback to our API, but, combined person and company or whatnot, and offer you the REST API that you want to use. And then that would be normal WatchCom certification, but then you are running your REST API on your server. But I hope that our REST API will be sufficient for 99% of what you guys want to do, and then a configuration will mostly be a recipe.
Call inside your CRM script to our own. We could put a call into there to our own REST web service, so it saves in our own database or whatever and loads from there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or in the recipe, you can just point it directly to your own REST service.
Yeah.
Like today, sometimes you think the product can be a little bit slow when you have these large customers with huge databases. You think this would be the solution? Now it would be much faster.
Much faster, absolutely. Now the thing is, I mean, if you have a huge database and it's not blazingly fast and there's 10,000 people using it, then that's still going to be to some extent a bottleneck. But here you will fetch data more seldomly from the database, so that's going to reduce load on the database. We will implement some kind of funny caches in the data manager so that maybe you can say that, well, I fetched this person already 30 seconds ago. Maybe we should just use the cached data that's in the browser. Let's say, for instance, out here you're going to have a drop-down component that lets you choose associates, right? Now, this is something we already have played around with and used to some parts in CS. That list of associates is just a separate REST call that can be cached. And in fact, we can keep track of, as long as you don't change associates in your system, which honestly doesn't happen that often, we can keep that cached in the browser, in the regular browser cache, meaning that when you fire up your user interface and we instantiate that drop-down control, it will say, give me the list of components, and the browser is going to say, I already have that on disk. We don't have to ask the database for that. So things like that is dramatically going to speed up the user interface. Any more questions?
What about the pockets, Jørund? Do you think this will take over everything?
No, I think not. Yeah, take over rule the world. No, I think that. Yes, but the Pocket CRM is an app, and anyone who's played around with web pages on a mobile phone knows that you can get to some extent a decent user interface, but our native app is always much more responsive, much better. So Eric's more on this than me, but I'm pretty sure that the Pocket will still be a separate sharp client for the mobiles.
But there's nothing preventing it to be used in
inside a web panel.
It will work perfectly, but I don't think it will be our strategy.
No.
To be honest. Not up to me.
We'll be able to use it to extend Pocket with web panels.
Yeah, of course.
This technology, I think.
Yeah.
Will work very well.
True. Good. Thank you very much.